People talk a lot about the world order changing, but maybe think of it this way. The U.S.-led system, it isn't just like collapsing dramatically. It's actually being quietly replaced. So today, we're doing a deep dive into something, well, pretty significant. It's this evolving relationship between India, Russia, and China.
Right.
And how their connections, which seem to be getting deeper, are fundamentally reshaping, the whole international picture.
That's a really good way to put it. Because it is quiet in some ways. We see the headlines about each country, sure, but the truly striking thing, it's the joined-up thinking, the strategic alignment that's emerging.
Exactly.
It's not just random events. It feels more like a systemic shift in how they interact with each other and with the established global setup.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most listeners probably know India, Russia, China, big players.
Yeah.
Right? Heavyweights.
Yeah.
But we want to go beyond that surface stuff today. We're going to unpack the how and the why behind this shift. We've been looking at some recent analysis that paints a really compelling picture.
And it's important to say, up front, this isn't about alarmism or predicting chaos.
No, not at all.
Our goal here is to look at the evidence. How are these three nations actually, in concrete ways, challenging the way things have been run? We're talking finance, resources, military stuff, tech, even diplomacy.
Right, all the key pillars. So yeah, settle in. This isn't about doom and gloom, but it is about understanding a really fundamental shift. And honestly, the speed it's happening at is, well, it's pretty surprising.
It really is.
Okay, so where should we start? Maybe with the money. The U.S. dollar's dominance seems like a big target.
Yeah, that makes sense. Challenging the dollar, as the world's main currency, that's definitely a key area. Russia's move away from it is maybe the most obvious. Driven by sanctions, of course, they had to react. So they've been cutting their dollar holdings, boosting reserves, and things like the Chinese yuan.
But China's approach feels different, more proactive. They aren't just reacting to sanctions themselves in the same way.
Exactly. China's been very strategic about promoting the yuan internationally. They're setting up loads of these bilateral currency swap agreements.
Okay, what exactly do those do? Simplify trade?
Basically, yeah. Two countries agree to swap their own currencies directly at a set rate. It means they don't need to use the dollar as a middleman.
Ah, bypassing the dollar.
Right. Lowers costs, reduces reliance on the U.S. system, and the fact they've got these deals with, over 40 countries now? Including a pretty big one with India just last year worth $100 billion. It shows the yuan is gaining traction.
Okay, but India's moves, they feel particularly interesting, don't they? Given their sort of historical links to Western finance.
Absolutely. India's shift feels more deliberate, potentially more impactful long-term. Their central bank has seriously upped its gold reserves.
I saw that number something like 27% since 2022.
Yeah, a huge jump. And that's not just, balancing the books. It signals hedging against uncertainty, wanting more financial independence, gives them more leverage, maybe?
And at the same time, they're holding fewer dollars.
That's right. Reducing dollar holdings while buying gold, it's a clear pattern.
And it's not just about what they hold, is that they're changing how they trade.
Exactly. This whole push for rupee-based settlements, it started mainly for buying Russian energy, because of the sanctions situation. But now they're expanding it, using rupees to trade with lots of other countries in Asia and Africa. Again, it cuts out the need for dollars in those specific deals.
And what about this BRICS payment system? We hear about it, but is it actually making a difference yet?
Well, it's definitely a concrete alternative to SWIFT, the main global messaging network for bank transfers.
Right.
The BRICS system, sources say it's already handling over $30 billion a month. That's not insignificant.
30 billion, okay.
And what's really interesting is India's taking a leading technical role in developing it. So you're building this parallel financial plumbing that, bit by bit, bypasses Western banks for a growing chunk of trade.
And India gets a key role within that new system.
Potentially, yeah. Gives them influence within the bloc.
Okay, so finance is shifting. Let's pivot to another basic building block. Resources. Energy, especially. This seems like glue holding this relationship together.
It really does. If you think about it, the energy cooperation gives this whole alignment a solid economic footing. Russia, facing bans in the West.
Had to look east.
Pretty much, yeah. Strategically redirected its exports.
And the figures for India are just wild, aren't they?
They are staggering. Russian oil going to India up over 2,000% since 2021. Just think about that.
2,000%, wow.
India is now buying something like 1.7 million barrels a day from Russia, and crucially, at discounted prices.
So win-win. Russia gets cash flow, India gets cheaper energy.
Exactly. It works for both, despite Western pressure.
And China's obviously a huge customer for Russia, too.
Oh, absolutely. China's Russia's biggest energy buyer overall, and they're building more pipelines to lock that in. Power of Siberia, too, is the big one everyone's watching.
What does that do? Soon?
Expected next year, I believe. And that pipeline is key because it lets Russia send gas east that used to go to Europe, a major redirection.
But it's not just oil and gas, is it? There's talk of a broader resource alliance.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. At the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit last year, that's the big Eurasian group,
Right, SKO.
they apparently formalized cooperation on other critical stuff, like rare earth minerals, materials for semiconductors.
The tech ingredients.
Exactly. And given how worried the West is about securing its supply of those things, this kind of coordination has major implications.
Okay, finance, resources. Let's move to military cooperation. This feels like a direct challenge to traditional U.S. dominance, doesn't it?
Arguably, yeah. This is where you see the most direct challenge to American global sort of projection of power. Russia's always been India's main arms dealer, historically.
Oh, that's long-standing.
But despite huge pressure from the West to diversify, that relationship hasn't just continued, it's actually deepened. New deals for advanced stuff, like the S-400 missile defense.
Yeah, that caused waves.
Transfers of nuclear submarine tech, even working together on fighter jets. It shows that military tech link is strong.
And meanwhile, China and Russia are doing more exercises together, seemingly more complex ones.
Definitely. Things like Joint Sea 2023, that exercise in the Philippine Sea, the location and the types of ships involved. It was unprecedented, really, a clear signal in the Pacific.
Challenging U.S. naval presence there.
That's how it's being read. Plus, they're doing these regular joint bomber patrols, flying nuclear-capable bombers together. That shows a level of operational integration that, frankly, would have seemed unlikely just a few years back.
So where does India fit into this military picture? Seems trickier. Our sources called it gradual integration.
That's a good description. India plays its own game. Strategic autonomy is the buzzword, right?
Uh,
But they are engaging more with Russia and China militarily. They sent observers to joint Russian-Chinese drills last year. That was a first.
Okay, observers, not full participants yet.
Correct. But maybe even more significantly, there's this agreement for India to share naval intelligence with both Russia and China in the Indian Ocean.
Wow, okay. That could really complicate things for, say, the U.S. Navy operating there.
Potentially, yes. It's a strategically vital area. That kind of info sharing is a big deal.
And then there's this joint research on hypersonic weapons. That sounds aimed squarely at U.S. tech advantages.
It certainly seems like it. Hypersonic, super-fast, maneuverable missiles are seen as a way to potentially get around existing missile defenses.
Like America's.
Exactly. So pooling their knowledge, Russian expertise here, Chinese there, maybe Indian input too. The goal seems to be to accelerate development and counter that U.S. edge.
Okay, moving from military hardware to the digital realm. This technology triangle seems like could have really far-reaching effects.
Absolutely. Tech is, arguably the main battlefield for global power now. And the collaboration we're seeing is, well, it's highly consequential.
Like China's GPS alternative. Beidou?
Yeah, Beidou. It's a direct competitor to GPS. And both Russia and India have now adopted it. That reduces their dependence on a Western-controlled system for navigation, timing, all sorts of critical functions.
And the semiconductor program, that sounds like they're trying to build a whole alternative supply chain.
It looks that way. And it's interesting how they seem to be dividing the work based on their strength.
How so?
Well, the idea is Russia brings its know-how in advanced materials needed for chip making. China brings its massive manufacturing scale, and India contributes its big pool of software engineers and chip designers.
Covering all the bases.
Potentially, yeah. It could create a more self-reliant ecosystem for critical chips, reducing their need for Western tech, and maybe reshaping the whole global market.
And India choosing Chinese 5G standards, not Western ones. That's a big infrastructure decision.
Huge. It locks them into a whole different tech ecosystem for mobile communications. It has massive implications down the line for everything from data flow to which companies dominate the next wave of tech, and potentially for surveillance concerns, too.
Right. And what about AI? There's talk of a big joint initiative.
Yeah, announced last year, I think. A joint AI initiative with reported funding around $30 billion combined.
$30 billion? That's serious money.
It signals a very clear intent to challenge Western leadership in artificial intelligence, which is becoming fundamental to, well, almost everything: economic competitiveness, military applications.
And Russia brings something specific to the table there, too.
Apparently, yeah. They have some advanced research in quantum computing.
Quantum. Okay, that's the really complex next-gen stuff.
Exactly. And the thinking is, if you combine that cutting-edge Russian research with India's software skills and China's manufacturing might, you could potentially leapfrog Western capabilities in quantum, which would be a massive strategic win.
Wow. Okay, so finance, resources, military tech.
Yeah.
What about diplomacy? How is this relationship changing things on the world stage? A diplomatic revolution, as some call it.
You definitely see more coordination. It's quite striking, actually. It makes it harder for the U.S. and its allies to push their agenda.
How so? Like at the UN?
Yeah, the UN is a good example. You increasingly see them voting together, either backing each other up or blocking resolutions led by Western countries. A more unified front.
And then there are these alternative clubs, right? Like
Right.
SKO and BRICS seem to be getting bigger, more active.
Exactly. Both expanded their membership significantly in 2023. That shows there's an appetite out there for forums that aren't dominated by the West. They offer different options for cooperation, for dialogue.
It feels like India is playing a really interesting balancing act here.
They really are. It's quite skillful, managing to keep strong ties with the U.S. while also deepening cooperation with Russia and China.
Like Modi hosting Biden and Xi practically back-to-back.
Precisely. That kind of thing really highlights India's pivotal position. They're central to this whole realignment, able to talk to everyone. It gives them enormous strategic flexibility.
And each of the three brings something different to this diplomatic effort, don't they?
Yeah, they play to their strengths. Russia still has clout through its energy and military power. It keeps them relevant. China provides the economic muscle, financial backing for a lot of this.
It really does paint a picture of a major challenge to American power. Some of our sources framed it as an American reckoning. Does that feel accurate?
Well, if you piece it all together, a lot of the old assumptions American policymakers relied on just aren't holding up anymore.
Like what?
Like the idea that Russia and China would always be too suspicious of each other to really cooperate deeply. So far, that's proving wrong. Or the assumption that because India is a democracy, its strategic interests would automatically align perfectly with the West. That's clearly being tested now.
And it's happening across all these different fronts at once. Money, resources, military, tech, diplomacy. That must be the really tough part for Washington.
Absolutely. The usual levers of American influence, the dollar's power, military edge, tech leadership, diplomatic weight, and institutions, they're all being challenged simultaneously and often in a coordinated way by this grouping.
What are the biggest potential economic impacts for the U.S. if this continues?
They could be pretty severe. If the dollar gets used less globally, it could make it harder and more expensive for the U.S. to finance its debt. That underpins a lot of American power.
Right.
Alternative payment systems, like the BRICS one, make U.S. sanctions less effective as a foreign policy weapon. People have ways around them. And if critical resources, like those rare earths or semiconductor materials, get preferentially channeled within this bloc, that could really hurt American industries that rely on them, disrupt supply chains, impact innovation.
And the military and tech challenges you mentioned are obviously huge, too.
Yeah. Militarily, the U.S. faces potentially coordinated challenges in multiple regions from powers with increasingly advanced complementary capabilities. Technologically, that partnership, especially in AI and quantum, could seriously erode America's innovation advantage.
And diplomatically, just being more isolated.
Potentially, yeah. Finding yourself outvoted more often in international bodies, finding it harder to build coalitions if this bloc holds together and offers attractive alternatives.
So, is it inevitable then? Is this the end of American dominance, as it were?
Well, inevitable is a strong word. The future isn't written yet. This India-Russia-China relationship, it has its own internal stresses and potential fault lines.
Like the India-China border issues.
Exactly. That's a major one. Historical mistrust, competing ambitions in Asia, very different political systems. These things create friction. They could limit how far the alignment goes long term.
But the direction of travel seems clear, doesn't it? The momentum is toward the fundamental shift.
The momentum definitely suggests that, yes, a major transformation is happening. And for U.S. policymakers, probably the most important thing is just to recognize this new reality, to stop working from an old playbook based on unchallenged unipolarity.
Right. Adaptation is key.
Seems like it.
Okay, so as we wrap up, maybe a final thought for our listeners. The comfortable post-Cold War world seems well and truly over. a more complex multipolar system is emerging. So the question to ponder might be, what does this mean for your view of global stability, of opportunity, in a world where maybe, just maybe, the U.S. has to get used to playing by rules it didn't solely create?